In this video, I'm going to show you how to prepare and file a LATE S Corp election, also known as Form 2553. I'm going to walk you through the form step by step and give you my insight on things to keep in mind when executing the sort of LATE S Corp election strategy, if you want to call it that. I'm also going to go over some common mistakes I see people make when completing this form, or at least completing this form on their own. And although I don't recommend that you do this completely by yourself, by the end of the video, you should be able to actually do that. You should be able to complete the form on your own, or at a minimum, you should sort of gain enough information and knowledge to where you could ask educated questions when interviewing someone, such as a tax preparer or CPA, so you feel confident that he or she kind of knows what they're doing and is knowledgeable about this process, right? But please, and I can't stress this enough, watch this particular video in its entirety, because I'm going to cover some important details after I show you how to complete the form. I don't want you to miss out or make mistakes because you didn't listen to the whole video, okay? Real quick though, if it's your first time here, welcome. My name is Navi Miraj. I'm a CPA that teaches entrepreneurs how to save thousands of dollars in taxes. And I do that here on social media, but I also teach it in an even more sort of comprehensive and easy to understand way through my course. You can find those details on my website, which is navimirajcpa.com. But for now, if you get value out of this video, then consider subscribing to the channel, or perhaps even liking this video and sharing it with a fellow entrepreneur who needs some information, on this particular topic about some of those other strategies that I talk about on my YouTube channel or on the various social media platforms. So maybe I should give you a little bit of sort of context and maybe back up for a moment and explain why you would even be doing a LATE S Corp election to begin with, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say you establish an LLC or even a corporation, and you did that in a prior year. So let's say you established an entity on January 1st, 2022, and it is now the following year, right? 2023 in our example. And for whatever reason, you didn't elect to have the LLC or corporation that you formed on January 1st, 2022, taxed as an S corporation by what I'll call the normal deadline. So what I mean by that is typically when you form an entity, you want to complete and submit the S Corp election form, the Form 2553, within 75 days of forming the business entity, right? And that typically lands around March 15th of the year, assuming you form that entity on January 1st. Fast forward 75 days, it's typically March 15th is that day. And so you want to have that submitted to the IRS so that they can approve it for you, right? That said, that's the perfect world. A large portion of the time, for whatever reason, you don't do that, right? And a number of things could be the reason for why you didn't do that. It could be that maybe you did actually complete the form, but you did it incorrectly and the IRS rejected it and you didn't even know that they rejected it. Maybe it got lost in the mail. Maybe you were waiting, this is very common, maybe you formed an LLC, but because you didn't know if your business was going to be profitable enough to where the S corporation made sense, you were waiting till the year is over to find out just how profitable it would be and elect S Corp status. Maybe if you're a viewer of my channel, you didn't actually know what an S corporation was and that it could save you thousands of dollars in taxes, and so you didn't even know this is something you could do. And there's a few other reasons, right? During my career, I've had clients tell me or prospects tell me, hey, I had a tax professional say that they were going to do this for me and they were going to take care of it. Guess what? They never did. Or you could just be a professional procrastinator, right? And you just never got it done. So anyway, there's a bunch of different reasons why this might occur, but I'm going to help you solve for that problem. What I'll do is I'm going to show you the instructions on Form 2553. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you to death and read it to you. I'm just going to show you where it says you can actually do this so you know. Then I'll walk you through the form itself, right? So I'll go through an example with you of an actual form and explain how to, complete it with the intention of filing it late. And afterwards, like I said, stick around to the end because I want to go over some important details that you actually need to be aware of when executing, I'm calling it a strategy, right? When doing this late S Corp election. Just to give you an idea of why you should stick around, I'm going to cover things like what you could expect to pay if you have someone else do this for you. Is it worth it? Does it make sense? Does it make financial sense to even do this? Things you might have to include on your actual tax return to let the IRS know that you filed a late S Corp election. What about, and you may not be aware of this yet, what about payroll? I mean, you're supposed to pay yourself reasonable compensation when you're an S corporation, but 2022 went by. We're now in 2023. How do I do that? Should you do this yourself? Can you do a late election prior to creating an entity? Sometimes I get that question. How to actually send the form to the IRS. I'm going to give you some ideas or what my thoughts are on how to get this to the IRS because there's special things that you need to do, okay? So let's just quickly look at the instructions. Like I said, I'm going to do those few things with you now. And you can just Google this form, right? You can just Google or type in Form 2553 instructions, and this should be sort of the first result that pops up for you. I'm not, don't worry, like I said, I'm not gonna read this whole thing, but I do wanna show you just, right here in the bold letters here, this is page 2, relief for late elections. And this is giving you some instructions on what you wanna do, right? You should take the time and read through this. Granted, it might confuse you, but reading these instructions along with what I'm going to tell you here in this video should give you enough knowledge for you to understand what you're doing here, right? So this here gives you the language you need to actually include on Form 2553 and on your 1120S tax return if necessary. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a bit, okay? So let me actually take you through the form itself. And I'm going to go through an example of a Form 2553. So when you pull up the document, and again, you can Google this, right? Just type Form 2553. It's probably within the first 1 or 2 results. The first page is this. This page is just telling you, hey, based on the state that your business entity was formed in, you want to send this to the following address, or you want to fax this to the following fax number, okay? So that's the first page. The second page is really where the form actually starts, all right? So in part 1, or let me back up. The first major thing you should notice about this form is the language here in the top margin of the first page. It says here, filed pursuant to Rev Proc 2013-30. You must have this here in the top margin or else it won't be accepted by the IRS. So you want to make sure that you put this language here. You can write it in as fine, or if you have software that allow you to add this to a PDF, you can do it that way, but handwriting in here is fine. All right. A lot of this stuff you could figure out on your own, but I found that people have made mistakes. So let's just run through it. Okay. The name of this entity, right, would be the name of the entity you formed with your state. So I'm trying to be a little bit sarcastic here. I'm saying professional procrastinator, can't even say it, professional procrastinator LLC. All right, that's the name of the business entity. Yours might say Inc., right? It might be a corporation or what have you. The address, right? I'm just putting 123 Main Street, Lazy Town, Florida, USA, zip code 12345. The EIN number that you are assigned. Date incorporated. So in part 1, letter B here, this is the date you formed the entity with the state. So in our example, I'm saying that this LLC was formed on January 1st, 2022, but it could be January 1st, 2021, if that's when I formed the entity, or it could be June 5th, 2020. No matter what, you're putting the date here in letter B. The date is the date that the entity was formed. All right. Let's kind of move on. Letter C, I put Florida. I don't know if I've mentioned that already, but the state in which your entity was formed, that's the state that's going to go here. D, you could check that box if it applies, if your name has changed or your address has changed since applying for the EIN listed in letter A here, okay? Typically that's not checked unless you moved or had a name change to your business entity. Okay, letter E. Election is to be effective for tax year beginning, month, day, and year. See instructions. I do recommend you read the instructions, but let me tell you, this is super important, okay? I have here written January 1st, 2022, because the LLC, this fictitious LLC I'm kind of making up, was created on that day. It was formed on January 1st, 2022, and it also is the day I want the election to be effective. However, if, for example, this entity was formed on June 22nd, 2021, then I would have June 22nd, 2021 in letter, sorry, I would have June, I'm going to mix myself up here. However, if, for example, the entity was formed on June 22nd, 2021, then I would have June 22nd, 2021 in letter B, okay, because that's when the entity was formed. And then let's say I didn't want the entity to be taxed as an S corporation in 2021. I would enter January 1st, 2022 in part 1, letter E here, okay? So in that example, I'm letting the IRS know the entity was formed on June 22nd, 2021, and I am electing to have the entity taxed as an S corporation as of January 1st, 2022. I hope you kind of caught that important distinction there. I'm saying, yes, on purpose, from June 22nd, 2021 through the end of 2021, I don't want to be an S Corp election for that period of time. I want to start this on January 1st, 2022, okay? All right. Letter F here, this is typically always going to be a calendar year. I mean, it's very rare that a small business would choose a calendar year, a tax year that's not the calendar year. Letter H, this is going to be the title of the officer. The name as well as the title, okay? A lot of people forget the title. I've seen when reviewing a lot of these forms that a prospect kind of wanted me to review. I would say, yeah, you missed the title here. Sometimes the IRS is picky about that. Sometimes they're not. The phone number that applies would go here too, right? Your phone number if the IRS needed to contact you. I don't think they ever call, but they might. So part 1, letter I, is the next major sort of section that you need to complete. So here's where you need to be a little, I guess, creative. Maybe that's not the best word, but don't overthink this, all right? I've included some example language here. So you're going to put in here, the reason this S corporation is being filed late is due to fill in the blank. You know, why is it being late? Probably you wouldn't want to put, hey, you know, just because I'm a professional procrastinator. You want to probably put a legit reason there, you know, and maybe put some other language. Upon this being discovered, all actions were taken to file form 2553 timely or, you know, as reasonably, you know, possible or something like that. The entity has been functioning as an S corporation since, you know, likely the date that you put here, January 1st, 2022, in our example, because you're telling the IRS, hey, I forgot to file a form, but in fact, the S corporation was operating as an S corp this whole time. It's just that a matter of the form was not being filed, okay? Bottom of page 1, this needs to be a wet signature. You may not know what that term is. It's kind of a little bit of an old school term, but do not try and be with the times and sign this electronically, okay? The IRS is old school. They want you to sign this with a pen. A real pen with ink, all right? So make sure you do not sign this electronically. You're gonna put your title again and put the date, whatever the date is what you'll put on the bottom of page 1 there, okay? Real quick, top of the page 2 and 3, as well as page 4, don't forget to put in the entity name again and your EIN. So I'll skip forward page 3. I've done that already. As well as page 4, I've done that at the top of the page. Okay, so don't forget to put the entity name and EIN at the top of each page. Moving along with this form, the name and address of each shareholder needs to be put here, okay? I'm just putting John Doe here because there's only one shareholder. And once again, it's important here in column K that you use a wet signature. Don't forget the address here either. A lot of people they write the name and they forget the address. So it's name and address, Over here, it's a wet signature, so a real pen. Do not use an electric signature. Date would be the current date, typically the same date that you signed the bottom of page 1 with. Number of shares or percentage of ownership, that gets a little tricky. If you're a corporation, you probably have shares from the get-go that were assigned. So it's, if there were 1,000 shares assigned, then you have, and you're the only shareholder, you probably want to put 1,000 here. If it's an LLC, you probably want to do more of like a percentage. So again, 100% ownership of the LLC, you could probably put that, okay? Dates acquired. So this would be the date that this ownership share was acquired, right? In my example here, I have January 1st, 2021, because that's when the entity was formed, okay? Column M would just be your social. Column N, this is almost always 12/31, 12/31, okay? Do not put a year here. It's month and date only. A lot of times I see people put a year, so like 12/31/2023 or something. No, don't do that. 12/31 is all you need. With the exception of the entity name and EIN at the top of page 3 and page 4, I showed you that already. These pages are almost always left blank, okay? Read the instructions very carefully, but to see if any of that would apply to you. Personally, I've never had to complete those sections, so chances are you don't either, okay? Good idea to read, though, part 4 on the very last page, okay? This might give you some ideas on the language to include up above when you're kind of coming up with your reason and using language. It's kind of telling you here, you need to sort of include the following representations in your statement that you're making up above, okay? So I told you I wanted to go over some important details to know. And here's sort of an important detail for you to know. I do have free sources on my website that you can go to form an entity. My website is just navimuradcpa.com. If you type that in, you'll go here, which is the home page. Like I said, there's some free resources here of businesses that will help you file an entity actually nowadays for completely free. There's some other free resources here too. One thing that's also here is that I did develop a course that's designed to help entrepreneurs save thousands of dollars in taxes. Admittedly, I don't teach completing the Form 2553 late, and that's because my students are actually learning how to do things properly, and so they don't have to kind of do this late election sort of thing, right? But they're learning those tax strategies that can save them a few $1,000s. So if you're interested, have a look here. If you click on this link, it'll take you to more information about the course. There's some videos or lessons you can actually preview. There's a video down below that you can watch for free that kind of walks you through all of the course contents, all right? But with that said, let me get back to the things related to late elections that are important for you to know, all right? So the first one is like, what could you expect to pay to have someone actually prepare this for you? If you're like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here. I appreciate the video, Navi, but like, I still need some help. I've seen many CPA companies or tax attorneys charge $500 to $600 to complete this form for you and file this properly with the IRS. Usually, though, they're not just completing the form, but as part of that fee, they're doing a little mini consult with you. And what they're doing is helping you to make sure that it's actually worth it for you to complete this form, and there's not something you're not thinking of, and maybe you should wait till the following year, or maybe it's not saving you as much money as you've read online or watched another YouTube video about, okay? Is it worth it? Is it worth going through this process? Well, that's going to be a case-by-case scenario, but just as a general rule of thumb, if you have at least $40,000 of profit, it may be worth it to be taxed as an S corporation. Again, the details of that can be found in some of my other videos where I'm teaching you more about the S corp strategy. So go on my channel, you can do a search for, how S corporations save money in taxes, and I can give you some examples of how that works. But usually, like I said, 40 grand or so in profit would maybe net you a small savings. However, if you have, 100, 150,000 or more in profit, then the savings can easily be $10,000 plus dollars. And it's not just 1 year, right? It's every single year. What are some additional things you might have to do when filing your actual 1120S tax return. So an S corporation has a separate business tax return. It's called an 1120S. This is super important, right? If you're completing the Form 2553 with a late election, all right, and you formed your entity on January 1st, 2022, and you watch this video and you're filling out the form, and let's say you're filling out the form in June of 2022, okay? So your entity was formed on January 1st, 2022. Let's say you're filling out the form June of 22. Well, yes, it's late because it was due 75 days after you formed the entity, right? We're now past March 15th, but you still have time to submit the late election and have the IRS accept it, which, by the way, can take 8 or so weeks. So if you're kind of waiting on the IRS to send you a letter in the mail that says that they've accepted your S Corp election, that can take 8 to 10 weeks, sometimes even longer, okay? But what I'm saying is, you formed your entity January 1st, you missed the normal deadline of waiting 75 days, you figured this out in June, and you send it in, well, you've got time, right? You've got 8 to 10 weeks. You can wait that long because your tax return is not due until the following year. Here's the catch though. If you formed your entity on January 1st, 2022, and it's now February of 2023, you don't have enough time for the IRS to spend 8 to 10 weeks approving it, because your 1120S tax return is due on March 15th, 2023, right? And you can't file an extension for more time because the IRS at that point doesn't even know your S corporation exists yet, right? Because you needed to file this form to even let them know. So what you have to do is you have to file Form 2553 along with filing your 1120S, your S corporation tax return. You want to do this, if you can, prior to March 15th, right? The due date of the 1120S tax return. If you do this, however, be sure to add the language in the instructions in the top margin of Form 1120S. I'm going to show you that, okay? Let's have a quick look at those instructions again. Here it says, right here, also, if the late election is made by attaching Form 2553 to Form 1120S, the corporation entity must enter in the top margin of the first page of Form 1120S includes late elections filed pursuant to Rev Proc 2013-30. So what it's saying is, I pulled this down in advance and I said, hey, this is your 1120S. In the top margin of the 1120S, you also need to have this language here, okay? Don't miss it. Now, if you're using sort of your basic TurboTax software, I don't know if you can even do that. That's why you might need to have a tax professional do this for you. Otherwise, you might have to file by mail. So if you waited past March 15th, or you don't have the tax software doesn't have the ability to kind of write this in the margin, you might have to do that file by mail, okay? Okay, next sort of issue. What about reasonable compensation, right? You're supposed to, and you may not know this if you're watching this video, you're supposed to be, if you're an S corporation, the sort of owner, the employee shareholder, needs to be paying itself sort of, or themselves, a reasonable compensation, right? That's what the IRS calls it. So can you go back in time and do that? No, right? We don't have time machines yet. So there is a solution, and I'm going to discuss that in actually another video I'll produce. So make sure you do subscribe with the notification bell on, and you'll be notified when that video is released. If you're watching, sometime in the future, sometime past, January 15th or so of 2023, that video is probably there already for you. So go ahead and watch that, all right? But I'm going to go into depth on what you can do. Real quickly here, I'll just touch on the fact that there is an option that, you're kind of, instead of issuing yourself true payroll, you are instead issuing yourself a 1099 in place of that payroll. Watch that video in its entirety. It's not something I recommend doing all the time, but there are unique situations where you have to do that. That's all you can do, all right? So listen, I taught you a lot about this, but trust me, every business owner seems to have a unique reason on why they may not want to be an S corporation, okay? So even when prospective clients come to me and they show me their regular Form 2553, not the late election, but just the regular one, I always find mistakes. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the time they've done something wrong and we have to correct it because it wasn't accepted by the IRS. So I highly recommend consulting with a tax professional who's familiar with this rather than trying to do this on your own. It can be a bit tricky. Okay, so that's something you should consider if you're trying to do this on your own. Here's another thing I'll mention. You can't do a late election for an entity that doesn't exist. Okay, that may sound a little bit silly, but just want to make sure you understand this. You can't do a late S Corp election for an entity that was never formed. Okay, that might sound a little bit obvious, but I get this question asked of me a lot. If you started a business on January 1st, 2022, but you formed your entity on July 1st, 2022, you cannot elect S Corp status for the period of January 1st through June 30th, right? Because you didn't have an entity during those periods, all right? If you created an entity on July 1st and then you carried that on through the end of 2022, then there might be a scenario where it makes sense to have the sort of profit that you earn from July 1st to December 31st of that year, maybe that portion of your income you can elect S Corp status on. It might make sense, it may not, okay? But for sure, for half the year, you basically operated as maybe a sole proprietor if you didn't have an entity. And for the other half, that's when you may have formed an LLC or a corporation and then elect to have that LLC or corporation taxed as an S corporation. Okay, a couple more things I want to cover. How to send, all right? So I always recommend sending either by fax, so you have a fax confirmation, or by certified mail. I believe in these instructions, it actually tells you to do that. And if you send it by certified mail, then keep your sort of delivery confirmation, because the IRS is going to make you prove that you sent it to them in the event you call them and they say, hey, we never got this form. So if filing form 2553 with your 1120S, then it can be sent electronically via what's called e-filing your tax return, okay? Assuming you're filing it on time. If you're filing your tax return late, right, after March 15th, you are probably gonna have to mail in Form 2553 and Form 1120S together, again, with the appropriate language I told you to put in the top margin, okay? I mentioned it earlier, there's some other resources, other videos, other free tools on my website. You can check that out, navimuradcpa.com. If you're watching this video on YouTube, I put the link to the course directly in the description below. Let me just say, before I wrap up, be sure to leave me a note in the comment section. Let me know what you learned from this video, what was helpful, what else did you want to understand better? What questions do you have? Did I lose you while going over some of this? I want to know so that I can create better content for you, all right? In just a moment here, a couple videos are going to appear next and I want you to watch them. One of those videos is a video spending a little bit more time on the whole S corporation strategy and how it saves you money in taxes. And the other video, which may not be linked just yet, depending on when you're watching this, is how to issue payroll after the year is over. So when you're an S corporation, I mentioned this earlier, you need to pay yourself via payroll and pay payroll taxes, but you can't after the year is already over. So that video will teach you the best alternative, all right? So don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you either in the course or in the next video.